Okay, Sharon, this is our third conversation, and we're going to start with a meditation in a moment. But before that, I just want to introduce to the audience, our focus today is going to be around the theme of trying to answer this question of what is support. And I think it's going to give us an opportunity to talk about our learnings from Virginia's work in a way, because this question is so broad, the idea of support in families, in friendships, in communities. And I think we'll touch upon a lot of the universal wisdom, which we've been talking a lot about. So I'd like to start with a meditation as a way of transitioning into this conversation. So why don't we take a moment to close our eyes and feel our feet flat on the ground. And let's first connect with our breath. A few nice, deep, nourishing breaths to get centered and grounded and connected. And just feeling whatever sensations of the body or inner sensations of emotions and feelings that are present. And if you could imagine that this moment of reflection and quiet can be a supportive exercise in your life. Just taking a moment to slow down, to pause, to let go of some of the tension that you may be carrying in your shoulders, in your stomach, in your face. Just allowing yourself to let go of any particular pressures or expectations or shoulds that may be circulating. In a moment, we're going to end the meditation. Just see if you can take a moment to appreciate yourself, or checking in, or connecting to the space inside. And appreciating who you are. Okay, so when you're ready, making a sound or a stretch or a movement to come back to the room you're in, and orienting yourself with your eyes and your body to where you are. And
thank you.
You're welcome. So Sharon,
Wonderful.
what comes to mind when you think about support, and then I guess on two levels, personally and within the context, the role as a people helper, as a therapist? What are some initial thoughts you have about that?
Well, what was interesting, Tim, was that you slow down, which is the hardest thing in the world for me to do, is slow down and reflect. What popped up was Jean McClendon's famous phrase that everything is better with support. And I went, yeah, it is, Oh,
I love that.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm thinking when you said that phrase is like everything's better when there can be a hug or something that's is a manifestation, like a physical act of a supportive thing. And I think about what the research tells us about the power of a therapeutic relationship, that it accounts for most of what helps change to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can be in a connected, supportive, nurturing context with one another, and we feel that, it opens up the possibility. And then we can get out of our stuck patterns and habits of thinking and behaving and feeling. So if we imagine that support happens in the space between you and I, or
Mm-hmm.
you and whoever you're working with, how would you describe, or how can you illustrate that experience? Because I find you to be a very supportive person, and I
Thank
feel
you.
so much inside when I'm receiving support from you. What is the embodied experience for you when that's the energy that you're offering to someone?
I think it's a feeling of joy, of being connected, and being in awe of all that you are, you know, and feeling fully accepting
Mm-hmm.
of wherever you are in your process, believing that's right where you need to be,
Mm-hmm.
and that um,
I think of this phrase that a variety of different people that work with groups of people or with individuals, whether they're doctors or naturopaths or yoga instructors or therapists, they talk about holding the space for someone.
mhm,
Right? When
mhm.
they're going through a healing process, it's important to be able to hold the space. What do you think they mean by that phrase?
I think it's being truly grounded yourself,
Mm-hmm.
um, so that you can be there for that person to help them walk through whatever the pain is, trusting that there is a possibility. I once had a teacher who said to us, as therapists,
Mm-hmm.
it's most people when they come into therapy are terrified because they are afraid if they get into their pain that nobody can take them out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had hundreds of people over the years say to me, if I start crying, I will never stop.
Okay.
Okay? So for me, it's being grounded in the fact that there is no such thing as a permanent emotion,
Mm-hmm.
and very, very clear after 38 years of experience that people can heal.
Yeah.
And having walked through my own pain and having walked through horrific pain
Mm-hmm.
with people, and knowing that there is a healing process, not necessarily in any small increment, I mean, and not any kind of quick fix by any means,
Yeah.
but that
Yeah.
that process is always there, uh, keeps me grounded so that I can hold that space for
Mm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I once heard that Carl Rogers said that he thought somebody would send out private letters to all his patients when he had worked through something, because very soon all kinds of his patients were then bringing up some issue, you know, and that they could sense in him that it's okay to go there now. And none of us had worked through all of our stuff, but the more we have, the more capability we have for holding whatever else somebody needs to walk through.
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying when Carl Rogers would come to a level of understanding about himself or
Yes,
some of his own work, then
yes.
he'd receive letters? Is that what you're saying? He'd
No,
receive letters?
he said it was as if
Uh-huh.
somebody had sent out letters to all of his patients saying, it's okay to go there now with Carl.
Oh,
He can
right.
handle it.
Right. So they would go places that they wouldn't have gone
Yes,
before. It's like
yes.
they could sense something different about him.
Uh-huh.
Oh,
Yep.
that's neat. Yeah, I had this when you were saying because you've gone to places of pain and done your own healing, the word guide, that someone who's been on that journey before, it's not exactly the same content, but emotionally it's a similar landscape. And from the experience of it, and a guide can help um, have the confidence to say your experience or your feelings aren't permanent and that
Mm-hmm.
you're in a process of moving through something.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I think to the idea that no feelings are permanent. It is possible though to get stuck in things though, isn't it?
Oh yeah,
And
very stuck.
especially when part of the whole pattern is a specific thinking pattern, a certain feeling
Mm,
pattern, a certain pattern of belief. And so that, I think that is the status quo experience that people are coming from. It's like
yes,
what I know is this chronic state of anxiety or
yes,
pain or anger. And
yes,
so I think the idea of going through that process, sometimes it's about the permanence of an even deeper pain, um,
yes,
but also a loss of what's familiar. Like who am I if I'm not in so much pain? Who am
yes.
I without this particular experience that has now become so familiar to me? Um, I, I guess I wonder in terms of support. I guess what you're saying is it's really important that that supportive person has a good sense of themselves, a good awareness of themselves, so that they can um, emotionally have the capacity to be there and
Exactly.
to
Yes.
uh, to normalize this kind of moving through the experience uh, to the other side.
And
Yeah.
when you use the word, the phrase "be there," the famous theorist and therapist Susan Johnson from Ottawa, who created emotionally focused therapy,
Hmm.
said that she came to the conclusion that the deepest longing that people have in intimate relationships is to have someone be there for them.
Hmm.
And when I heard her say that, I thought, well, that's pretty simplistic. But then my ears started listening when I was working with couples, and that would come up over and over again. You weren't there for me. I
Mm-hmm.
needed you to be there, and you weren't. And I'm holding all that resentment and anger, you know.
Yeah.
And like you said, people can get stuck in it. Virginia used to say there's a difference between the pain of blame and the pain of recognition. And people can get stuck in the pain of blame.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, because blame is connected to the expectation, the should.
Mm-hmm.
You should have. And then that
Mm-hmm.
separates people from the
Mm-hmm.
reality of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And without being able to move through that reality of what happened, if it's you should have, it's like, well, now I'm stuck because we can't travel back and
Right.
change what happened in the past.
Right.
But we can update that experience through, if it's an interpersonal relationship,
Right.
by the acceptance, the acknowledgement of
Mm-hmm.
what was missed.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be the corrective emotional experience, the relational experience then can heal from that, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I think a lot with what we're talking about in terms of the context of parenting, how much parents struggle with, how, my kids had a tough time, they're being bullied, I don't know what to do, or they're really anxious, they're not willing to, go to bed on their own. So how do I support them through that? Um, yeah, what would you, in terms of that, the various roles, whether it's between couples or within families, what do you see as being helpful in terms of helping educate um, or guiding them towards trying something different? Because
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, there's a certain pattern that happens that
Right.
is not supportive.
You know, I'm always learning, and one of the things that I realize that I can get stuck in trying to help people let go of shoulds.
Yeah.
And so what I've been doing recently is saying, yes, they should have,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
whoever they're blaming, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
And that's the loss and the grief.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, many, many, many years ago, I had a couple that had been, I don't know if I mentioned this before, I had a couple been married for 25 years and a constant, constant conflict. And what eventually emerged was that she was stuck in the pain of blame because he dropped her off to deliver their baby, went to
Mm.
work and said, call me when it's over.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so she had never let go of that resentment,
Yeah.
and it's like, yes, he should have stayed with you, and he
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
Allowing her to grieve that loss and that expectation, and then see if with that acceptance she can move out of it rather than immediately trying to help people go, You need to let go of the should.
Yeah, because I think that's dangerous because if I have an expectation that I'm safe in my marriage and I'm physically assaulted, I should hang on to that expectation that you shouldn't hit me, right?
Exactly.
Why would I let go of that expectation? Now, what we can look at is if I hang on to that expectation, I still need to go through a process of accepting that's not what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What was going on there for the other person and for me,
Mm-hmm.
so that I can make a decision. Is this a relationship that I can stay in or not? Is
Mm-hmm.
there a process that we can engage in that will help rehabilitate or heal this so that we can be in a different kind of relationship? But it's not sacrificing the should, it's putting it in its proper place. That should is never going to be actualized now in that moment because that moment's over. It's
Right.
questioning, does that have a chance to be actualized now or somewhere in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the pain when people get locked into blame and they get into this rigid, as we would describe it, locked into an iceberg about that,
Mm-hmm.
then it's the expectation of, well, you didn't do what you should have done. And so therefore, I feel ashamed of that. I feel low. And then I'm also putting you in a conclusive box of you're not going to be other than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's two icebergs, two very solid, conclusive things that have happened, and then there's that's I think where hope dies. So to transition from that and coming back to the theme of support, how do you help clients? One of the things you said is to acknowledge the should,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, there's something in the acknowledging. Can you speak a little bit more to how that's supportive, and then sort of where they go from there?
Mm-hmm. I think it completely fits with what we're talking about, which is that people long to be understood and
Mm,
heard and seen, and so huge amount of support is being able to empathically reflect what you hear somebody understanding. I mean, experiencing. Not that
yes.
that perception is necessarily accurate, because most of our perceptions are in some way distorted, because they all come out of our experience,
Yes.
and the conclusions we made. But to begin with, you
Yeah.
need to feel that somebody else feels you, senses you, gets with your perception what you're experiencing.
Mm, mm-hmm.
Even when I'm working with somebody who's suicidal, I want to be able to voice, because most people want to skip that part because it's too scary. I want to be able to voice, you're feeling like the pain is too much, you can't stand it, you don't want to live anymore. Now, I may say right now to kind of
Mm-hmm.
qualify that. So, I'm hinting that this is temporary, but I want to be right there in their shoes,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
with that.
Yeah, and that's such a, I think, powerfully authentic way of being supportive because it's acknowledging where they are at that moment in
Exactly.
time, which is the
Yes.
only thing you can do.
Yeah.
It's what's alive and present in that moment. I think about the contrast, and we were talking about this before, of the the sort of generalization that um, women can be, and this is not a general statement, women can be more in touch with their experience and their emotions, and then sometimes men are a bit distant. Now that can go in either direction, and in same-sex couples, there's sometimes the dynamic plays itself out in that way, where one is more in touch with their inner experience, and one
Mm-hmm.
is far away from that, whether
Mm-hmm.
that be emotions or yearnings or what have you. And I think what you were saying in terms of this yearning to be understood and seen, it's like I think both need that, but one may be more aware of how important that need is, and they're asking for it, and they're asking for it, and maybe one has sort of normalized or is completely ignorant to that as even a human experience because maybe they
Mm-hmm.
never experienced it in their growing
Mm-hmm.
up. So that when you describe that, the man that
Mm-hmm.
dropped off his wife to it's what's his point of reference for that? And
Right.
again,
Right.
it's not to excuse bad behavior,
Right. Right.
or to excuse what should have happened that somehow shouldn't have happened. No,
Mm-hmm.
it's what was needed. The human need in that moment was support
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
safety and
Yeah.
presence and all of that. the support on the other side is what allows, I think, for that transformation to happen for
Mm-hmm.
both partners.
Mm-hmm.
It's the trying to deeply understand where the other person was coming from, to acknowledge the missing behavior, the missing insight, the lack of a pattern of compassion or perspective taking that was going
Mm-hmm.
on over there. Then it
Mm-hmm.
makes it possible for a change to happen, and
Yes.
for something of like forgiveness or grace
Yes.
to
Yes.
then be part of what's existing between those two
Right.
people.
Right.
But the fixation, I think what is toxic is this fixation on the should, which becomes resentment, which
Yes.
becomes like Gottman's, four horsemen of the apocalypse, the
Right.
stonewalling, the
Right.
defensiveness, the criticism. It's all that is just then the rigidity of what happens
Yes.
between people.
Yes.
So this, and I think, when you were talking before about these universals,
Mm-hmm.
it's like the ingredients for that healing has got to be something that allows the resentment and the shoulds to soften. Um, can you speak to that in terms of, I don't know if you do work with couples, or in terms of what shifts need to take place in order for people to really soften that should, and to
Mm-hmm.
soften their anger, and to get out of that blame stance,
Mm-hmm.
and then to be able to connect to that initial yearning,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the other side of that, to then have some space for their partner who screwed up,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who missed the opportunity. So yeah,
Yeah.
what
And
would
I
you say
think
about
it,
that?
first of all, it's the hardest. The hardest thing to do is support your partner because you have
Hmm.
so much invested.
Mm.
But I'm reflecting on a powerful, powerful series that was on Masterpiece Theater in the United States the last 3 Sunday nights about the life of Alexander Wilson,
Hmm.
who was his. What turns out in the series is that his wife, that thought she was the only wife when he died,
Okay.
um, and had 2 boys, discovers that she's one of 4.
Oh wow.
Period of time. I mean, it's just one hellish discovery after another.
Right.
And he had been a part of what he told her was a part of the British Foreign Service. And then she couldn't figure out what lies there were. And it was just hell. And then the boys began to realize their father wasn't who he was.
Mm.
So she goes to a priest and says, "What do I do with this? I cannot forgive him. I am just beside myself. I'm
Hmm.
devastated." And the priest said, "Well, forgiveness begins with understanding." So she takes that and she goes to the place that she knew that he thought of as his home place. And it turns out that that was actually a hospital during World War I where he had been a patient
Mm.
because he had been terribly wounded in World War I. And really sounds to me like became psychotic, because she's able to interview the woman who took care of him, who said that he had night terrors all the time. And the woman herself said, "Yes, all the time I was married to him, he had night
Hmm.
terrors." Okay.
Right.
And he would scream and he would scream. And she said, and then one day, one of the physicians realized that what might help him would be to create stories. And so he brought in a typewriter. And she said, the man starts typing stories in which there were happy endings to horrible tragedies of war,
Mm.
you know. And then she said, all of a sudden he starts to sleep and he starts to eat, and we can see him coming back to himself.
Right.
And so what happened was that he created a life of stories that were fantasies, right? And
Hmm.
when the wife heard that, you could see her begin to shift into that other her heart. She began to go, oh my
Hmm.
God, I was the victim of his lies and were my sons, but also these other women were, and their sons. So it turned out to be 4. And all because he was a victim of war,
Right.
and that compassion. And when I've worked with couples, and this is not easy because, like you talk about, all those defenses are like, rah! They're really in there, and they've got these terrible scripts going between them. They can give
Hmm.
you their horrible scripts, but they can't get out of them.
Yeah.
how to help them get to that other place where they can hear through me or through the therapist or a different perspective that person of what's
Mm,
going on inside of them,
right.
and then what their heart is feeling and what they're longing for. And I
Right.
have watched situations where when we get there, there is such a melting in the room, it's just mind-boggling. You talk
Yeah.
about melting the iceberg, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And maybe I'll say later on, like, well, what happened with that issue you started fighting about with the mother-in-law? And the person who was doing the blaming will say, I can deal
Yeah.
with her.
Yeah.
And I go,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Yeah. 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 Because there's a different energy when you go from the should, which is in your head,
Yeah,
and then maybe the muscles of tension,
yeah.
to the softening of your heart. And I guess the thing that I'm picking up is just how important stories are. One, the stories were important in terms of bringing this man back to life from his, I guess, psychotic or I don't know what the state, I don't know anything about this person, but, and then there's something really important about having a cohesive narrative, a cohesive
Yes,
story
yes.
for your own uh, mental health. Like, what does it mean when you can apply meaning
Hmm.
to something that seemed so horrible or
Yes,
so
yes,
meaningless?
yes.
And
Absolutely.
we're all kind of left after situations of divorce or of death or whatever tragedies that
Hmm.
we're faced with in life, to make meaning of that. And
Yes,
although it didn't change, like with this woman you're describing, it didn't change what happened.
right.
She opened up more energy of seemingly compassion that allowed her to soften and
Yes,
expand her perspective
yes,
of her husband.
yes.
And yeah, I think that's the process in terms of what we're aiming at, when
Hmm.
it's support between
Hmm.
us and the people we're working with, and then what we're hoping to encourage between a couple with each other.
Right.
It's that
Do you know, I also
expansion.
want to say a caveat to that, Tim, and that
Hmm.
is, uh, I think there are some things unforgivable
Mm-hmm. Okay.
that I have been a witness to as a therapist.
All right.
And I never ever want to give somebody the expectation as a therapist that they have to forgive,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's always a choice.
Right. Yeah. I think about forgiveness in two levels, and maybe there's more. There's the forgiveness that you offer at the level of yourself, which is a process of accepting what happened, never
Hmm.
approving of negative or destructive behavior, and then a letting go of that for yourself, for your own healing. And then the second part is trying to figure out whether a forgiving process can happen in the manifest relationship, in the actual here and now, to reestablish a relationship. And if the other person is not available for change, if they're, um, or if the act was so heinous that a relationship cannot exist, then that forgiveness, that relational forgiveness, cannot happen. And it's the acceptance of that. Um, but I try to differentiate
Tell me
about.
more what you mean by accepting and then letting go for yourself. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that.
Well, for example, if you came from a background where your parents or one of your parents were abusive, physical or sexual or otherwise,
Hmm.
it's um, it's getting to a place, and this is very difficult, of course,
Hmm.
getting to a place where the should have happened didn't,
Hmm.
and it's not approving of it, but acknowledging, yes, that's you should have been safe,
Hmm.
and your physical safety, your emotional safety should have been prioritized. You
Hmm.
were the kid, and to accept and to move into a forgiveness process of, one, forgiving myself, because oftentimes people are carrying that shame and saying, what did I do to deserve this?
Yes,
Maybe something
yes,
they're
yes.
carrying that. So it's one at one
Okay,
level,
gotcha. Good.
a
Okay.
forgiveness of letting that go and forgiving the
Yes,
self.
yes.
um, but then also differentiating the forgiveness at the level of the self of the other person, that they were so limited, and they were corrupted in such an evil way, that the behavior that came out was that, you know, and to forgive and to let go. Because if the individual, that person who is victimized, stays in the should against themselves, I should have done something differently, or the anger and resentment, that has a toxic effect on themselves in their own life. So letting go of that is, I think, very important in terms of being able to let the energy flow again, to be healthy, to be vital. I'm differentiating that as a forgiveness process for the self, and then a relational forgiveness process, which is I'm trying to figure out, like, to have a relationship, you need to be able to meet each other's needs, and to if you can't meet the should now, trust that you're going to get there at some point. And when that can happen, because the other person is unwilling or too violent, or they're limited in a variety of ways, then the individual who was hurt needs to decide and say, this, I let go of you in peace. Like, this is not safe for me to have a connection with you. So, so I'm going to step away from this hurtful and toxic connection. So that relational forgiveness is not always possible. But I think the level of the forgiveness at the level of self is always available.
I really like the way you articulate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that, the question, maybe we can focus on this as a theme over the next few conversations, because I think there's a lot to unpack, and I've really enjoyed exploring with you how support looks in a variety of contexts. So why don't we continue this more the next time?
Sure. Okay. Great. All right.